Officer Kelsey Monroe used to sleep well at night, confident her crooked deals with local real estate moguls would stay buried. But that was before Ebony Royce, black, female, U.S. Army veteran, stepped off a Greyhound bus and walked back into a hometown suffocating under corruption. For years, dirty cops and bought-off officials at Midtown Precinct crushed small businesses, planting drugs, inventing fines, and forcing owners to sell cheap. They thought no one could stop them. They were wrong. Because Ebony didn't just serve overseas. She survived war zones that make these back-alley shakedowns look like kindergarten recess. And when her best friend nearly dies for asking the wrong questions, Ebony takes it personally. Now, the city's worst nightmare has a name. With classified training, unbreakable resolve, and a heart set on justice, Ebony Royce is about to bring down a system too rotten to stand. So, stay tuned. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories of unstoppable courage, make sure you're subscribed. Because when a battle-hardened soldier decides to go to war on her own streets, there's no uniform thick enough to shield those who hide behind a bat. Ebony Royce had felt many kinds of heat in her life: the scorching desert sun in Afghanistan, the oppressive humidity in Louisiana summers, and the flash of muzzle fire inches from her face. But there was a different heat in the air that morning, a suffocating pressure that had nothing to do with the weather. She stood in a quiet alley in St. Aurora, a mid-sized opportunity to her parents' generation. Now it was suffocating under the grip of corruption. Ebony felt that invisible chokehold with every breath she drew. She was nearly 35, an Army combat veteran, honorably discharged after an incident that nobody liked discussing. Dark eyes traced the crumbling bricks of the alley as she listened for footsteps. A storm was coming, and Ebony had learned long ago to watch the horizon for signs of trouble. She had survived war zones. She'd survived a life that tried to break her at every turn. But there was something about her hometown that made her chest tighten with a special kind of dread. Maybe it was because she cared more than she let on. She shifted her weight, the tension in her muscles reminding her that she was alive in ways that bored civilians couldn't comprehend. Growing up, she'd never considered the Army until a recruiter came to her high school, praising her sharp mind, her athletic prowess, and her discipline. A life of service had seemed noble. She had been whisked away into a world of training, discipline, and battlefield missions that tested the fiber of her soul. Then it ended, and Ebony found herself back home, trying to reassemble a normal existence. But St. Aurora had changed, or maybe it had always been this way, and she just saw it clearly now. The city was rotting from within. She took a final drag on the coffee she'd been nursing and tossed the empty paper cup into a nearby bin. Adjusting the hood of her jacket, she emerged from the alley onto Maple Avenue. Even at midday, the light seemed muted, as though clouds hovered perpetually over the city. A few passers-by hurried along the sidewalk, not meeting each other's eyes. Ebony tucked her hands in her jacket pockets, scanning the rows of old storefronts, each battered by time and neglect. It was impossible not to notice how many of them were shuttered or half-occupied. The once bustling main street felt half-dead, haunted by a sense of looming crisis. A sign across the street read Grace Deli, letters flaking on an old metal board. She remembered a time it had served the best smoked brisket in town. Now it was closed. Ebony's mind flickered to the reason behind so many boarded-up businesses. Extortion, intimidation, jacked-up property taxes that suspiciously never actually improved the roads or local schools. If businesses didn't pay the extra fees demanded by certain officials, they found themselves buried in fines or confronted with random building platform violations. Ebony had heard the rumors of property seizures, under-the-table deals, crooked cops who accepted hush money from wealthy real estate developers. At first, she hadn't believed it. St. Aurora had once felt safe, but after a friend's father lost his restaurant under circumstances that never added up, Ebony started digging, and she found more than she bargained for. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Ebony glanced down at the screen, seeing a text from an old Army buddy, Cameron Grant, one of the few connections she maintained from her service days. Cam had also come back stateside, working at a local security firm. He texted, "You asked about suspicious stuff around the Midtown Precinct? I have info, let's talk." Ebony exhaled. Midtown Precinct. Rumored to be a hub of dirty cops who used their badges to terrorize small business owners. She texted back. Where are you? He replied, my place. Hurry. Her heart thumped with a low, ominous drum beat. Cam's laconic tone spelled trouble. She spun on her heel, crossing Maple Avenue, ignoring the slight pain in her knee from an old combat injury. It was 2 blocks to the parking lot where she left her truck. Her boots made a steady rhythm on the uneven sidewalk, a soundtrack to the tension swirling inside her. She kept her head low, hood up, stepping around an older man rummaging through the trash. She didn't notice the sleek black sedan pulling away from the curb, tinted windows rolled up tight, following her from a distance. When Ebony reached her old black pickup truck, a 10-year-old Ford that had seen better days, she hopped in, turning the key. The engine rattled before finally catching, and she pulled out onto the street. Traffic was light, which was typical for a weekday in a struggling neighborhood. Once, the factories here provided jobs for thousands of working families. Now they were shuttered, replaced by empty warehouses and vacant lots. All that remained were the vultures who picked at the scraps, the crooked cops who earned extra money by leaning on folks who had nowhere else to go, and the real estate moguls who wanted the land cheap. She kept an eye on her rearview mirror, a habit ingrained from years of combat deployments. That black sedan was behind her. She couldn't be certain it was following her. Maybe it was just coincidence. But Ebony felt a shift in her gut. Instinct told her to switch lanes abruptly, so she did, turning onto a side street. The sedan followed. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She pressed the gas, weaving through a series of back streets, trying to see if the sedan would keep pace. It did. A small voice in her head whispered that she should be very careful. The city wasn't the Middle East, but a threat was a threat. She sped up, heart pounding, scanning for an out. By the time she made 3 more turns, the black sedan had vanished. Maybe they'd backed off or found something else to do. Ebony forced herself to breathe normally. She didn't know who was tailing her or why, but she had an inkling. You come back from war hoping to find peace, she thought. And instead, you find a new kind of battle in your own hometown. She headed for Cam's apartment, a modest complex near the industrial district. It was the kind of place that looked cheaper than it was, with a flimsy security gate and chipped stucco walls. A single flickering street lamp glowed outside. Ebony parked and climbed the concrete steps to Cam's unit on the 2nd floor. She knocked twice. No response. A chill grazed her skin. She knocked again. Louder, nothing. Her nerves sang with warning. She turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. Quietly pushing the door open, Ebony stepped inside. The living room looked ransacked. Cushions were thrown around, drawers opened, papers scattered across the floor. Her throat tightened. "Cam?" she called softly, scanning every corner with the methodical caution she'd perfected overseas. It was eerily silent. She moved through the small hallway, opening the door to the bedroom. Cam was there, lying face down on the floor, unmoving. Ebony dropped to a crouch, pulse hammering in her ears. She checked his neck for a pulse. Faint, but present. "Cam," she whispered urgently, gently turning him onto his back. A gash on his forehead bled onto the carpet, and his eyes fluttered open. He tried to speak, but could only manage a slight moan. She recognized the signs of a concussion. "Stay still," she said, heart clenched. "I'm calling an ambulance." Cam's hand shot up, gripping hers with surprising strength. No ambulance," he slurred. "They have cops, on payroll, not safe." Her mind spun. She'd seen men try to talk when they were disoriented from head trauma. Often, they didn't make sense. But something about Cam's urgency told her he believed it. She pulled out her phone, but hesitated. If the people who did this were indeed the same corrupt cops or their accomplices, an ambulance might bring trouble. "Then we'll do it ourselves," she said grimly. "Let's get you out of here." Gently, Ebony helped him into a sitting position, scanning the room for an immediate threat. No one else was inside. The place reeked of upturned drawers and desperation. Once Cam could stand, albeit wobbly, she draped his arm over her shoulders and guided him outside to her truck. She'd handle first aid herself if she had to. Field medicine was second nature. She helped him into the passenger seat. As she started the engine, he groaned again, blinking rapidly. "You said you had info," Ebony murmured, glancing at him. "Tell me when you can." He nodded, breath ragged. "My contact, inside the precinct. Found documents, deals, hush money, developers. Name is Granger Holdings. They front for a bigger fish. Told me Midtown cops are collecting, tipping off. Evictions, arrests, shaking down folks." He coughed, the effort seeming to tear at his chest. Ebony reached into the back seat for a bottle of water. "Here, sip." She cracked the top, holding it so he could swallow a small amount. "We'll get you fixed up, then we'll figure this out." He nodded with gratitude, but the fear in his gaze told Ebony something bigger was at stake. She wondered if that black sedan belonged to whoever had attacked him. She wondered how many were in on this game, and she wondered if she was about to rejoin a war she didn't even know she was fighting. Ebony drove with steady focus, heading toward an out-of-the-way clinic that served veterans. It wasn't fully official, a small place funded by non-profits that specialized in helping those who'd slipped through bureaucratic cracks. A friend of hers, Dr. Ramirez, worked the night shift there sometimes. Ebony hoped Ramirez was on duty. She parked around the corner, out of sight. The building was squat, with a single flickering neon sign that read, "Free medical consults for veterans." She guided Cam inside. A tired receptionist glanced up, recognized Ebony from previous visits, and hurried to call Dr. Ramirez. Within minutes, they had Cam on a rickety exam table in a back room. Ebony hovered in the doorway as Ramirez, a woman in her 40s with salt and pepper hair, checked Cam's vitals. Ebony had to remind herself to breathe. She'd seen too many friends get hurt by hidden traps in foreign deserts. The sense of helplessness gnawed at her. She forced herself to focus on the present. This was a different battleground. Ramirez closed the door behind them after finishing preliminary checks. She spoke quietly. "He'll be okay. Likely a concussion, some bruised ribs." "What happened?" "Someone attacked him in his apartment," Ebony replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "He told me they might have been cops." Ramirez's expression darkened. "We've seen a few cases like that. Folks who come in with injuries that can't be explained by random thugs." "I don't want trouble, Ebony," Ebony sighed. "I don't want to drag you in. But you're saving his life, that's all." Ramirez nodded warily. "I'll keep him for observation. Night shift is quiet. No one else here. But if they're watching, you have to be careful. I don't know who's in whose pocket these days." Ebony gave a grateful nod. "Thank you. I owe you." She stepped back inside to see Cam once more, watching him rest. He was stable but exhausted. A swirl of anger and guilt coursed through her veins. She was the one who had asked Cam to snoop around. The city's corruption had become a puzzle Ebony couldn't let go of, and now Cam was collateral damage. She could almost hear the echo of her army commanding officer's voice. "Don't go poking tigers you aren't ready to fight." But Ebony believed she was ready. She just needed to know how high this all went. She left the clinic and returned to her truck, half expecting more watchers. None. She set her phone to speaker, calling a certain number she'd memorized long ago. A voice answered. "Ebony? Been a minute?" "Cassandra, I need a favor," Ebony said. Cassandra Washington was an investigative journalist Ebony had known since high school. Stubborn, idealistic, occasionally reckless. Exactly the person Ebony needed. "I have reason to believe we've got dirty cops in Midtown Precinct. Possibly local big shots behind them. You've heard the rumors?" "I hear a lot of rumors." Cassandra's voice carried the tension of someone who'd already looked into it. "Sources are too scared to go on record. Are you saying you've got proof?" "Not yet," Ebony said, "but I have a lead. My friend was attacked. He managed to say the name Granger Holdings. Ring a bell?" Cassandra paused. They're rumored to be a real estate front. The deeper rumor is that the real boss behind them is, well, a bigger fish. Some folks say the name Wyatt Industries. Others say there's a silent partner. I've tried to look into it, but every door is slammed shut. If you dig too far, you can lose your job, or worse. Ebony's jaw clenched. I can't let it go, Cass. This city is dying under the weight of corruption. People's lives are being ruined. It's too big for me alone, though. I need help. Silence on the line. Then Cassandra exhaled. I can start asking around, but Ebony, be careful. These people play dirty. They destroy reputations, families. You know that quote we used to laugh about? When you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you? That's from Nietzsche. This time it might be real. Ebony closed her eyes. I'm not backing down. Just watch your six, Cat. They ended the call. Ebony sat there, engine idling, feeling a storm churn in her chest. She'd grown up on these streets. She remembered playing hide-and-seek near the old library with her younger cousins. She remembered her parents working long hours at the local factory, proud to support their family, proud to live in a city that once had real hope. Now the factory was shut, the library boarded up, and her parents had retired to a remote corner of the state to escape rising crime and high property taxes. Ebony had once left for war. She had come back and found a new battlefield waiting. A place where those with money and influence abused the powerless. She eased onto the main road. The flickering neon lights of half-empty shops slipped by like ghosts. Cassandra was digging. Cam was in a clinic bed, paying the price for Ebony's curiosity. Ebony told herself that if she walked away now, she'd never forgive herself. Part of her spirit had always been a warrior's soul, and injustice felt like an insult she couldn't ignore. She might stand alone, but she'd stand anyway. That night, Ebony took every precaution. She avoided returning to her small apartment, suspecting it might be under surveillance. Instead, she rented a cheap motel room with cash on the far side of town, a place that asked no questions. She triple-locked the door and propped a chair under the knob for good measure, then set her phone on silent. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by nightmares from overseas. Sudden bomb blasts, the screams of old comrades, and spliced with fresh images of Cam bleeding on the carpet. She woke before dawn, sheets damp with sweat, adrenaline spiking. At sunrise, she decided to visit a local eatery she'd heard about. Ruby's Kitchen, a diner owned by a longtime resident named Ruby Phillips, known for her resilience. Ebony had heard that Ruby, an older black woman with a strong sense of community, had faced pressure from certain city inspectors. Yet her diner remained stubbornly open, serving bacon and eggs and hope every morning. Ebony wanted to see if Ruby could provide any insights. When she walked in, the bell above the door jingled. The interior was warm with the scent of frying bacon, fresh coffee, and cinnamon. The checkered floor was a bit worn, tables a bit scratched, but Ebony sensed a fierce pride in every detail. Behind the counter stood Ruby herself, arms folded, her eyes keen. She offered a polite smile. "Mornin'. Sit anywhere you like." Ebony chose a stool at the counter. Ruby brought over a cup of coffee. Ebony nodded her thanks, sipped, then gently asked, "Things been quiet lately?" Ruby eyed her with curiosity. "Quiet enough, but we get interesting visitors sometimes. You new in this part of town?" "Sort of," Ebony said. "I grew up in St. Aurora but spent years away. Came back to find it changed." Ruby's lips pursed. "Change doesn't always mean progress. This place used to be alive. Now it's like a candle burning out, flickering. We try to keep it going best we can." Ebony glanced around. A few patrons occupied booths along the windows, all of them with tired faces, quietly discussing the day's troubles. She leaned in a little. "I heard you had some run-ins with city inspectors?" Ruby's brows arched. "Word travels fast." She let out a weary chuckle. "Yes, I had them come around not too long ago, complaining about everything from my stove ventilation to the squeaky door. They wrote me up for nonsense, threatened to revoke my license. But the weird thing is, a week later I got a call from some real estate group offering to buy my place. Said it'd solve my stress." Ebony felt her pulse rise. "Did they give a name?" Ruby tapped her chin. "They mentioned a partnership group. Granger Holdings. I turned them down. This diner was my daddy's, and I'm not selling. Next thing I know, I get a letter from the city claiming I owe back taxes. More nonsense. I'm fighting it, but Lawyers cost money I don't have. The mention of Granger Holdings made Ebony's blood run cold. I'm sorry you're going through this, Ruby shrugged, eyes glinting with determination. I'll hang on as long as I can. A wise friend once told me, a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a person perfected without trials. She believed adversity brings out who we really are. Ebony recalled the words Cassandra had said about the abyss. She offered a sad smile. I admire your spirit. They parted with Ebony, promising to come back. She left a generous tip. Outside, the morning sun glinted off the parked cars. Ebony's phone vibrated. A text from Cassandra read, I found something on Granger. They're tied to Midtown cops, also to a bigger fish called Creighton Wyatt. Paper trail is murky. Let's talk. Ebony typed back, where? Cassandra responded, City Park Fountain, noon. Ebony hated meeting in public, but a popular place might deter any direct ambush. She drove across town, scanning the mirrors for any sign of a tail. Nothing obvious. City Park was a green patch in the midst of urban decay. An artificial lake, a few well-kept walking paths, and a stone fountain near the center. She parked and walked carefully, keeping situational awareness. Cassandra was already there, wearing a casual jacket and jeans, phone in hand, her curly hair pulled back in a bun. They greeted with a quick hug, though Ebony still scanned for watchers over Cassandra's shoulder. The journalist's expression was grave. She held up her phone. I did some digging this morning through old property records and news archives. A few names kept popping up, Midtown Precinct, Chief of Police Carl Summers, and Creighton Wyatt. Then I found an old snippet about Wyatt's real estate expansions. He's the money behind Granger Holdings, Ebony. He's also rumored to have friends in City Hall. Ebony's heart pounded. So Wyatt's the spider at the center of the web? Cassandra nodded. Seems like it. He invests in properties that get seized or forced into foreclosure. Police raids or code inspections push owners to sell cheap. Wyatt flips them or builds new developments. Everyone in power gets a cut. Ebony considered the scale of it. If that's the case, we're talking about multiple layers of corruption. A friend of mine was attacked for looking into this. People might vanish if they push too far. Cassandra's eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and resolve. That's what they rely on. Fear, silence. Look, Ebony, I want to expose this, but I need hard evidence, documents, recordings, enough that they can't just bury it. Ebony recalled Cam's mention of a contact within the precinct. Cam said there was a whistleblower inside Midtown. If they have records, like times, places, transactions, that could be our smoking gun. We just have to reach them without tipping off the entire precinct that we're onto them. Cassandra swallowed, scanning the passers-by. I can't just walk into a police station and say, hey, can we have your corruption files? We need a plan. Ebony rubbed her temples. We'll find that contact. Maybe we can arrange a secret meet. Let me talk to Cam again. Meanwhile, keep your eyes open for anything linking Wyatt directly to the cops. A photo, a financial transaction, something to pin him down. A breeze rippled across the park, stirring fallen leaves around their feet. Ebony noticed a man in a baseball cap standing near a tree, seemingly watching them. She couldn't be sure. Nudging Cassandra's elbow, Ebony whispered, We're being watched? Cassandra turned discreetly. The man in the cap immediately pretended to look at his phone, then wandered off. Cassandra let out a shaky breath. This is bigger than us. But you know that quote about the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object? I guess that's us, Ebony. They try to bury the truth, but we keep digging. Despite the tension, Ebony smiled at the reference. They picked the wrong women to intimidate. For a moment, she remembered the desert nights with her army team, huddling together after a firefight, sharing half-serious jokes. In the army, we used to say, pain is just weakness leaving the body. I guess we'll see how true that is. They parted ways carefully, each heading in opposite directions. Ebony's mind swirled with strategy. She needed backup, resources, but she was unwilling to trust official channels, not with so many cops possibly compromised. She thought of an old contact, a retired detective named Patrice Dawson. Patrice had left the force a few years ago under suspicious circumstances. Rumored to have complained about corruption, she might help. Ebony visited a dingy bar on the east side that Patrice supposedly frequented. It was a small, low-lit place that smelled of stale beer and broken dreams, with a few scarred wooden tables and a flickering neon sign behind the bar. Ebony asked the bartender if Patrice was around. The bartender, a wiry man with silver hair, shrugged. "She's in the corner. Might be half asleep by now." Ebony found Patrice slouched in a booth, nursing a whiskey. She was in her early 50s, hair close-cropped, a lined face that spoke of countless nights spent wrestling with regrets. She barely looked up. "Don't got money. If you're selling something, I ain't buying." Ebony slid onto the bench across from her. "I'm not selling, Patrice. I just need answers." Patrice's eyes flickered with curiosity. "Who the hell are you?" "Ebony Royce. I was told you know a thing or two about the Midtown precinct, especially the dirty side of it." A bitter laugh escaped Patrice's lips. "I know too much. It's why I'm out on my ass." Ebony leaned in, voice low. "I want to bring them down. The extortion, the property grabs, the hush money. I know you tried to fight it. I heard rumors you left because you refused to be part of it." Patrice sighed, swirling the whiskey in her glass. "I was naive, thought that if I reported certain superiors, internal affairs would do something. Instead, I got stonewalled. My cases vanished, and they made my life hell. Early retirement was forced on me. I guess I can't let it go. But who are you to take them on?" "A soldier, back from war," Ebony said. "I see what they're doing to my hometown, and I can't stand by. A friend nearly got killed. I've got a reporter on my side, and there's a potential whistleblower inside the precinct. But we need guidance. We need to know how they operate from the inside." Patrice studied Ebony's face. "The precinct's rotten at the top. Some of the rank and file might be clueless or just scared, but a core group runs the real scam. They funnel the money up through a chain that probably connects to wealthy suits in the city. If you want proof, you have to get inside their files. Physical logs, digital backups. They keep duplicates to cover their own asses. Don't ask me how I know. These guys are paranoid. They back up everything so they can blackmail each other if needed." Ebony's pulse sped up. "So, if we get hold of those backups, we can blow the whole thing wide open." A dark look passed over Patrice's features. "Or get yourselves killed. They watch those files closely. Even the whistleblower you mentioned, if they exist, might not have full clearance. It's dangerous. But if you're serious, I can share what I recall about the precinct layout, who might be storing backups, but that's all." "I'm not suicidal." "Thank you," Ebony murmured. "I appreciate any help you can give." Patrice nodded, draining her glass. "You know the saying, courage is fear that has said its prayers and decided to go forward anyway? You're going to need that, because once you start this, there's no turning back." That night, Ebony found another motel. She wasn't taking chances. Patrice had emailed her a rough outline of the precinct's key offices and which detectives might be on the take. Reading the notes made Ebony's stomach clench. Names she recognized from her youth popped up. Men she'd looked up to as a child. Men who had once patrolled the streets, offering friendly waves. It was like discovering your favorite teacher was a criminal. She fought the bitterness that rose inside her. She also got a brief message from Cassandra, indicating she'd found a lead on someone named Carson Adams, rumored to be the whistleblower. He worked in records management, specifically in evidence storage. Ebony's plan began to take shape. She'd approach Carson discreetly, confirm his willingness to help. Then, if they got those backup files, Cassandra could run a story that no politician or police official could silence. The risk was enormous. Ebony recalled a line one of her Army instructors used. "Sometimes, you have to risk your life to save what matters." She'd done it before, overseas. Now, she'd do it here. The next day, Ebony disguised herself as best she could. Plain jeans, a ball cap, hair tucked away, nondescript jacket. She circled the Midtown precinct in her truck, looking for vantage points. The building was a squat fortress of concrete, with patrol cars parked out front. She spotted multiple cameras. Her plan wasn't to barge in. She'd do this carefully, wait for Carson Adams to leave for the day, then approach him. She just needed to confirm his usual schedule. From a side street, Ebony watched the employees' entrance. Officers and staff trickled out. Eventually, a man with a slight build, short hair, and a backpack emerged. He matched the photo Cassandra had dug up. Carson Adams. Ebony let him get halfway down the block before sliding out of her truck and following at a distance. The streets were busy enough to give her cover. She stayed behind him until he stopped at a small, run-down coffee shop. She waited until he bought a coffee and sat alone at a back table. Then she approached, sliding into the seat across from him. Carson blinked, startled. "Excuse me? Do I know you?" Ebony kept her voice low. "My name is Ebony Royce. I'm a friend of... a friend. I know what you've been trying to do. I need your help to take down the corruption at Midtown." His face drained of color. "I don't know what you mean." His hand shook slightly, coffee sloshing. She pressed on. "You do. You've seen the files. You know who's on the payroll, who's orchestrating property foreclosures. Maybe you've told someone, maybe not. But I'm here to say, I'm on your side. I want to help expose them." He swallowed hard. "You're going to get me killed. If they suspect I talked to anyone..." "They already suspect people." Ebony cut him off. "A friend of mine got attacked for snooping. My journalist friend is under watch. The only way we survive is if we blow it open. Once it's public, they can't single us out so easily." Carson's eyes flicked around the coffee shop, as though expecting armed men to burst in. "They control everything," he whispered. "I've seen what happens when people cross them." Ebony took a deep breath. "I was in the army, deployed in war zones. This is different. But I know one truth. You either stand up or get walked over. Are you willing to give me what we need? Actual copies of the backups, the logs, the transactions, everything. We can protect your identity. My friend has contacts that can help with witness protection or a safe house." Carson hesitated for a long moment, tears welling in his eyes. "I never wanted to be a hero. I saw them ruin so many innocent people. One day, I couldn't keep quiet. I started copying files onto an external drive, just in case. But I'm not sure I can get them out now. Security's tighter. The stuff is in a locked server. I can access it if I'm alone, but the system logs might show that I downloaded files." Ebony nodded slowly. "We'll figure out a plan. Perhaps a staged glitch or forced reboot that covers your tracks. Or we do it after hours. Is there a time you can be alone with the server?" Carson rubbed his temples. "I can try. End of the week my supervisor is out. I sometimes pull extra hours. Maybe then." She placed a small burner phone on the table. "Contact me here when you're set to move. If you feel unsafe, call me or text. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you alive. After we get the files, we'll deliver them to my journalist friend. Then we blow this up. The big fish can't hide if we set the entire city's eyes on them." Carson picked up the phone as though it were a live grenade. Okay, God, what if I'm making a huge mistake?" Ebony's voice softened. "It's a risk, but not doing anything is a bigger mistake. They're bleeding this city dry." He slowly nodded. "All right, I'll do it. End of the week." She rose, adjusting her cap. "Stay safe. Don't trust anyone in uniform unless you're sure they're clean." She started to leave, then paused. "Thanks, Carson. You're braver than you realize." Outside, Ebony's heart hammered. Securing the files was half the battle. Publishing them quickly and widely was just as crucial. If the corrupt faction got wind, they'd clamp down. She texted Cassandra. "Potential operation end of week. Stand by for evidence drop." Cassandra replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. "Plus, I'll coordinate with a national outlet to protect the story from local sabotage." Ebony headed toward an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts, a place she'd scoped out earlier as a fallback location to stash people or evidence if necessary. She needed to ensure it was still discreet. The building was a hulking shell, its windows boarded up. Inside, the dusty floor and echoing darkness gave Ebony a moment of déjà vu from a particular deployment in a bombed-out ruin. She shook off the memory. If Carson needed immediate hiding, she'd bring him here temporarily. She spent the afternoon purchasing basic supplies: water, first aid items, non-perishable snacks, a cheap cot. This reminded her of prepping an FOB, forward operating base, overseas. The difference was that the enemy now wore badges and business suits in her own country. The thought made her grip the steering wheel tighter. She would not let them keep terrorizing innocent folks. Her convictions felt righteous, but Ebony also acknowledged the danger swirling around. In war, righteous beliefs didn't keep bullets away. She double-checked her sidearm, a legally registered handgun she carried for self-defense since returning from active duty. She prayed she wouldn't need it, but in this twisted scenario, she just might. 3 days passed, filled with uneasy waiting. Ebony checked on Cam, who was recovering steadily under Dr. Ramirez's watchful care. He had no memory of the actual attack, just the moment the door crashed open. Ebony promised him she was close to exposing the culprits. He grabbed her hand, eyes fierce. "Don't let them scare you off. St. Aurora needs someone who can't be bought." She visited Ruby's kitchen for coffee each morning, exchanging polite smiles with the owner. The tension in the diner was thick. Everybody knew about the shady dealings, but nobody openly acknowledged them. Even as Ebony sipped her coffee, she overheard a table of older men muttering about more foreclosures. She wanted to stand up and shout, "We're going to stop it!" But she knew revealing any plan publicly was dangerous. For now, she was a quiet sentinel, biding her time. Finally, on Friday, the burner phone buzzed. Carson texted, "Supervisor left. I have the building to myself for a short time tonight, 9 p.m. Ebony breathed deeply, adrenaline already surging. This was it. She texted Cassandra the code phrase they'd agreed upon. "Eagle takes flight at 9. Cassandra replied, "Roger that. Ready to publish once we have the goods. I'll be at a safe location with secure Wi-Fi. Keep me updated." Ebony double-checked her gear. She wore dark clothes and comfortable shoes, hair braided and tucked under a baseball cap. She brought a small backpack with a laptop, an extra burner phone, and a flash drive to back up anything Carson retrieved. She slid her handgun into a concealed holster. It was one thing to have a plan. It was another to face the reality that if things went wrong, she might have to defend herself with lethal force. She parked a few blocks from the precinct, noticing the typical bustle of squad cars. 8:45 p.m. The sky was overcast, city lights reflecting on low clouds. She found a vantage point in a dark alley across from the employees' entrance. People occasionally went in and out, but eventually the foot traffic slowed. At 8:58, her phone buzzed. "Carson." "I'm in." "Hurry." Ebony let out a slow exhale and crossed the street, moving quietly until she reached the side door Carson had mentioned. It was cracked open, just enough for her to slip inside. The corridor was dimly lit. She could hear the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the faint murmur of a radio from somewhere deeper in the station. She moved down the hallway, following Carson's directions to the records storage room. She found it near the back, a simple door with a frosted glass window reading evidence/records. Inside, Carson waited by a desk cluttered with folders. He looked paler than ever, sweat dotting his temple. He breathed shakily. "I used my clearance to get the server room unlocked. The backups are on a system behind that locked door." He pointed to a gray metal door with a keypad. "I have the code, but we only have a few minutes before the security protocol logs us out. Then we have to vanish. If they find me here at this hour, it'll raise questions." Ebony nodded. "Let's do it." They slipped into the server room, which was small and chilly, lined with humming equipment. Carson typed in a code on a panel and a set of green lights flickered, granting them access to a specific backup drive. He inserted a USB stick he pulled from his pocket. Ebony watched the progress bar appear on a monitor. It crept forward agonizingly slow. Her nerves were taut. She imagined officers strolling in any second. The server's quiet drone felt thunderous in her ears. Come on," she whispered. She checked the hallway through a narrow window in the door, half expecting footsteps. None yet. At 70%, Carson's phone pinged. He glanced at it and froze. "Security alert. Someone's accessing cameras near this room." Ebony's pulse raced. How much longer? He clicked the screen to see the transfer. 2 minutes. I can't speed it up. Ebony inhaled. We hold here. The second it's done, we go out the side door. My truck is a few blocks away. He nodded. The last minute felt like an eternity. At 100%, Carson yanked out the USB. Ebony pulled a second flash drive from her backpack. Copy it again, she insisted. We need a spare. Carson hesitated, eyes flicking to the camera feed on his phone. Then he relented. Another tense minute dragged by. Finally, Ebony had a copy as well. She tucked it in her waistband under her shirt. Let's move. They exited the server room quietly, shutting it behind them. Carson led Ebony down a side corridor. Footsteps echoed from the main hallway. Ebony pressed herself to the wall, beckoning Carson to do the same. A figure strode by, wearing the uniform of a police officer. He didn't turn his head, seemingly on some other errand. Once he passed, Ebony guided Carson around a corner. They reached the employee's door. Carson tapped in his code again. The door clicked, and cold night air flooded in. Ebony scanned the street. Clear. They stepped out, carefully closing the door. Carson's breathing was ragged. God, Ebony, that was... Suddenly, headlights blazed at the far end of the alley. A black SUV lurched forward, tires screeching. Ebony grabbed Carson's arm. Run! They sprinted, the SUV's engine roaring behind them. She heard a shout, possibly, "Stop!" But Ebony had no intention of stopping. They bolted onto a side street, the SUV swerving to follow. Ebony spotted her truck half a block ahead. She fumbled with her keys as they ran. They reached the truck. Ebony yanked open the driver's door, shouting, "Get in!" Carson scrambled to the passenger side. The SUV was closing fast. Ebony's adrenaline soared. She started the engine, slammed the gas. The truck jerked forward. The SUV veered, trying to block them. Ebony swerved onto a narrow lane, sideswiping a trash bin. The SUV thundered behind them, headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. Carson stared wide-eyed at Ebony, chest heaving. We'll never lose them. They have police comms. Ebony's mind shifted into combat mode. She twisted the wheel, taking random turns. Another black and white squad car appeared at an intersection up ahead, lights flashing. Ebony recognized the tactic. They were setting up a perimeter. She slammed the brakes, spun the wheel, and shot down a side road. The truck bounced over potholes. The SUV behind them skidded, nearly crashing into the squad car, but quickly recovered. Ebony's heart hammered. She'd done plenty of high-speed maneuvers in army convoys, but doing it in a city with corrupt cops chasing her was a fresh brand of terror. She glimpsed Carson's face, pale with fear. She had to lose them quickly. She spotted a narrow alley, more like a gap between old buildings, barely wide enough for her truck. No time to hesitate. She turned sharply, scraping the side mirrors. Sparks flew, but they made it in. The SUV was too big to follow easily, at least not without caution. She barreled through the alley, rattling over broken pavement, ignoring her stuttering heartbeat. She emerged on a deserted street, behind a row of warehouses. She kept going for 2 more blocks, ignoring every jolt of the suspension. She saw no immediate sign of the SUV. She took a final left, heading to the vantage point near the abandoned warehouse she'd prepped. Engine roaring, she steered inside a large open gate behind the building, killed the headlights, and braked to a stop. She and Carson breathed heavily in the dark cab, hearts pounding. For a tense moment, Ebony listened for sirens, screeching tires. Nothing. They might have shaken them, but it wouldn't be long before the precinct organized a search. She turned to Carson. "We're going to lay low here, you okay?" His face was slick with sweat. "Yeah, I think that was insane." Then he looked at the USB stick in his hand. "We got the data?" Ebony nodded. "Both copies. That's the main objective." She exhaled, grateful to be alive. "Let's get inside. This place is off-grid. We can't stay forever, but it'll work for tonight." They slipped out of the truck into the gloom of the warehouse's rear lot. Ebony led Carson into the building, using a small flashlight. She locked the door behind them. The interior was musty and cavernous, cluttered with old crates. Ebony flicked on a single lantern. I have some supplies. She set up a folding chair for Carson, offering him bottled water. He collapsed onto it, still shaking. Ebony perched on a crate. We'll send the data to Cassandra soon, then she can upload it to secure news servers. Once it's out, these bastards lose their secrecy. But we can't do that from my phone. They might track us. Carson's eyes lit with realization. I have a signal-blocking bag in my backpack. Makes it safer to connect without being traced. We can patch in a secure VPN, send the data discreetly. Ebony gave a tight smile. You're prepared. He shrugged, looking uncertain. I started being paranoid once I realized how deep this goes. They quickly set up a small hotspot from the phone, placing the device in his bag that contained a portable router. Ebony powered up her laptop. Adrenaline hammered in her veins, making her fingers twitch. She typed in Cassandra's secure channel. Cassandra responded almost instantly. What's your status? Ebony typed, We have the data. We're hidden. Ready to transfer. Cassandra, send it. I'll blast it to multiple outlets and cloud backups. Then I'll file a story. But watch your back. They'll come after you more viciously once they realize it's public. Ebony inserted the flash drive. The sense of finality made her spine tingle. She clicked upload, and the progress bar advanced. Carson hovered anxiously beside her. Once the file was at 100%, Ebony attached a succinct message. Evidence of corruption in Midtown PD, connected to Granger Holdings. Owned by Creighton Wyatt. Full logs attached. More details to come. Cassandra typed back, Got it. This is big, Ebony. We'll break it wide open. And for good measure, I'll share it with a national investigative journalism group who'll co-publish so local powers can't bury it. Sit tight. Once this hits, everything changes. Ebony's relief was immense. She half laughed, half choked. It's done. They can't stop it now. Carson's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Thank God. Now what? Ebony looked at him seriously. We wait. We might have to disappear until the story breaks. Once it's out, they can't hush it up, but they can still come for us. If you want to vanish entirely, we can arrange that. I have a friend who can help you relocate. Carson's voice trembled. I might. My life is here, but I won't survive if they find me. Let's see how it unfolds. They settled in for a long night. Ebony patrolled the perimeter every hour, scanning the dark streets for suspicious vehicles. She found nothing. In the quiet moments, she thought of Cam, possibly still in that clinic. She wondered if the same cops chasing her would go after him, or if Dr. Ramirez had managed to keep him hidden. Her guilt rose again, but she reminded herself that revealing the truth was the best way to protect everyone. By dawn, Ebony's phone was buzzing non-stop. Cassandra had unleashed the story. Headlines from multiple news sites displayed references to systemic police corruption, real estate scandal, Granger Holdings linked to Midtown PD. Ebony read snippets with a mixture of triumph and fear. The cat was out of the bag. Calls for an independent investigation into the precinct were already trending on social media. The mayor's office was forced to issue a statement about looking into these allegations. Carson scrolled through the news on Ebony's laptop. We did it, he murmured, face pale with relief. Oh man, we really did it. We did, Ebony agreed softly. Now we see how they react. Within hours, a firestorm consumed St. Aurora. Politicians gave frantic interviews, the police chief promised a thorough internal review, and the city council scheduled an emergency session. Creighton Wyatt's name was plastered across front pages, his office refusing to comment. Ebony realized it was a matter of time before arrests started or official steps were taken, but she also knew the truly powerful often tried to slither away. By late morning, Ebony's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. A voice announced itself as FBI Special Agent Keller. Ms. Royce, we're aware of the documents you helped release. We want to speak with you for a statement. It's best we do this in a controlled manner. Ebony exchanged a look with Carson. She remembered Patrice's warning. Not everyone in federal agencies was guaranteed to be clean, but the FBI might at least be outside local influence. Ebony replied, Let me think about it. I don't want to end up in a compromised situation. Keller's tone was measured. We've already been in contact with your friend Cassandra Washington. She suggested we coordinate. I assure you we're starting an official investigation. We plan to put certain police officers on administrative leave. You'll be safer with us than on the streets. We can also protect your witness. Carson stared, wide-eyed. Ebony weighed the risk. If the FBI truly was stepping in, it might be their best shot at real safety. Give me an hour, Ebony said, then hung up. She called Cassandra. The journalist confirmed that Agent Keller had indeed contacted her, offering official protection. Cassandra believed him to be legit, though Ebony remained cautious. They agreed on a neutral place to meet, a local TV station that was cooperating with Cassandra's coverage. Ebony would arrive with Carson, talk to the FBI in the presence of the station's management. That might minimize any double-cross. Carson pressed trembling fingers to his forehead. It feels like we're stepping out of the shadows straight into a firing squad, but okay, let's do it. They drove carefully, avoiding main roads, scanning for tails. The city seemed tense. Ebony spotted clusters of citizens reading newspapers or checking their phones with startled expressions. Police cruisers roamed with sirens off, as though uncertain how to handle the uproar. They arrived at the TV station, a modest brick building with a tall radio tower behind it. Ebony recognized Cassandra's car out front. They parked in a rear lot, stepped out, glancing around. At the station's entrance, two people stood waiting, Cassandra and a tall man in a dark suit, presumably Agent Keller. Cassandra gave Ebony a warm but anxious smile. Keller extended his hand, showing an FBI badge. Ebony examined it closely. So far, it looked authentic. They moved inside, bypassing the curious stares of a few station employees, and found a small conference room. Ebony and Carson sat on one side, Keller and Cassandra on the other. Keller thanked them for coming. First, let me commend you for exposing something that's been rumored for years. We've suspected an organized ring of corruption, but local ties made it difficult to gather evidence. Your data changed that. Carson swallowed. So what happens now? Keller folded his hands. We're placing certain officers on immediate suspension pending investigation. We're also looking at city officials who might be implicated. We'd like your official statements. We'll put you both under protection if necessary. Witness protection is an option, especially for you, Mr. Adams. Cassandra chipped in. I'll continue releasing updates, but Ebony's safety is a concern. She's been threatened, she served in the army, she can defend herself, but that's not a permanent solution. Keller nodded. I can't force you to accept protection, Ms. Royce, but I strongly recommend it. Ebony's jaw tightened. Let's see how this unfolds. My main priority is ensuring Cam's safety and that of others who might be targeted. I also want to see Creighton Wyatt held accountable. The city's known for a while that his pockets run deep. Keller's expression was resolute. Wyatt's name is all over these files. If half of it sticks, we can push for a federal indictment. But he'll have an army of lawyers. I can't promise it'll be easy. Ebony felt a wave of grim satisfaction. As long as he doesn't get to slink away scot-free. Before the conversation could continue, Cassandra's phone rang. She stepped aside, answering quietly. Moments later, she returned, face pale. That was a source. Reports are coming in that a couple of officers tried to visit Dr. Ramirez's clinic, possibly to find Cam. Ramirez hid him, but the officers threatened staff. This is happening right now. A flicker of rage shot through Ebony. She turned to Keller. You see, they're already retaliating. They'll do anything to muzzle people. Keller stood. I'll dispatch an agent to secure that clinic. No more lone wolf visits from compromised cops. Let's maintain control. We have the law on our side now. Ebony's heart hammered. She pictured Cam lying injured in a hospital bed. She clenched her fists. I'm going there. Keller raised a hand. Wait. Let me send a protective detail. You can follow in your truck if you want, but don't go in guns blazing. We're stepping in officially now, understood? Benny nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I'm not letting them touch Cam again. Keller arranged for 2 unmarked FBI vehicles to escort Ebony to the clinic. Carson would stay behind at the TV station for safety. Cassandra insisted on going as well, to report the events. Ebony almost told her to stay put, but realized Cassandra had every right to see justice with her own eyes. They drove in a tense convoy across town, ignoring the gawking stares from pedestrians who saw the flurry of tinted SUVs. At the clinic, Ebony hopped out. 2 local police cars idled outside, lights flashing. Ebony's heart lurched. She marched forward, with Keller and 2 other agents flanking her. One of the uniformed officers approached, brow furrowed. "Federal jurisdiction?" he scoffed. "We got a call about a suspect here." Keller flashed his badge. "We have probable cause to believe your suspect is a victim of attempted murder and intimidation. You have no authorization to be here. We'll take over." The officer glared. "We have every right. Our intel says he's connected to the big corruption story. He needs questioning." Ebony saw the swirling tension. "Let's cut the crap. You're from Midtown, right? We all know what you're trying to do. Step aside, or the FBI will have a reason to detain you for obstruction." The officer exchanged a look with his partner, who seemed less certain. They stared at Keller's unflinching stance. Finally, with a muttered curse, the pair retreated to their squad car. Keller nodded to Ebony, who rushed inside. Dr. Ramirez was there, relieved, but visibly shaken. She led Ebony and Cassandra to a back room. Cam was upright, looking anxious. "Did they come in here?" Ebony asked, breath ragged. Dr. Ramirez's eyes flashed. "They tried, but I refused access. They threatened to arrest me. That's when I called Cass's contact number." Ebony's shoulders relaxed slightly as she turned to Cam. "You're safe now. The FBI's here." She exhaled deeply, tension pouring out of her. If anything had happened to him, she'd never forgive herself. Cam gave a half smile, though Ebony saw fear in his eyes. "Thanks for not forgetting me," he joked weakly. She forced a smile. "Never." Behind them, Keller spoke quietly into a phone, apparently coordinating the next steps. Ebony caught snatches of his words. "We have the victim, ensuring safe transport to a secure facility, a protective detail." She allowed herself a glimmer of relief. The system was finally mobilizing, some parts of it anyway. Outside, Ebony heard raised voices. She, Cassandra, and Cam ventured to the lobby, where the 2 Midtown officers were arguing with one of Keller's agents. The tension was high. Ebony recognized the cold stare in one of the officers as someone who thought he was untouchable. She stepped closer, meeting his glare. She caught his name tag. "O'Neill," he spat. "Don't think you can barge in with fancy FBI badges and take over. We have rights too." Keller's agent calmly responded. "We have a federal directive to investigate police misconduct. If you interfere, you'll be charged." O'Neill's lip curled. "You fools have no idea the storm you're unleashing. People in high places aren't going down without a fight." He shot Ebony a hateful look. "You're crossing lines, soldier girl." She bristled at the disrespect. "I've crossed worse lines in actual war zones. At least I knew who the enemy was there. You disgrace that uniform." He opened his mouth for a retort, but Keller came up behind Ebony, voice steady. "Officer O'Neill, you're officially relieved of duty pending an internal affairs investigation. Turn in your badge and weapon." O'Neill's partner looked shaken, but O'Neill's face contorted with rage. "On whose authority?" "Mine. We have evidence linking you to illegal activities," Keller stated, unblinking. "Now surrender your gear." For a tense moment, Ebony feared O'Neill might reach for his gun, but the presence of multiple armed federal agents was formidable. Slowly, O'Neill unhooked his belt, letting it drop. His voice dripped venom as he said, "You're all making a big mistake. This city isn't going to welcome your meddling." Keller's agent stepped forward, collecting O'Neill's sidearm. Another agent escorted him out. Ebony felt shaky. She'd encountered men like him in war, arrogant, violent, convinced they were above consequences. She found no satisfaction in seeing him disarmed, only a grim sense that more conflict lay ahead. That evening, Ebony, Cam, Cassandra, and Carson were all placed in a safe hotel under FBI watch, at least for a few days, while the investigation ramped up. Ebony disliked feeling caged, but accepted it might be wise. Cassandra was glued to her phone and laptop, publishing updates, By now, the scandal was national news. Big outlets were picking it up, pointing out how local cops colluded with real estate moguls to strong-arm small businesses and property owners. The city's police chief insisted he was innocent, calling the evidence fabricated. Ebony snorted at the TV in her room. These denials were typical. She believed the scale of evidence was too big to ignore. 2 days later, the state attorney general announced that multiple warrants had been issued for officers, city officials, and employees of Granger Holdings. Ebony heard the news from the small lounge in the safe hotel, a flutter of hope rising in her chest. Cassandra high-fived Ebony, laughing in relief. "We did it, Ebony. They're not wriggling out of this one." Carson, leaning against a wall, still looked nervous. Even if they arrest them, the system moves slow. Wyatt might skip town or manipulate things behind the scenes. Cassandra's phone buzzed. She looked at it and gasped. They just arrested Creighton Wyatt at his penthouse. A tipster said the feds showed up with a SWAT team. This is real, guys. Cam, seated on a couch with a bandaged head, closed his eyes. "I can't believe it. We actually might win." Ebony felt tears threatening. She coughed them down. "Yeah, we just might." She found herself recalling a quote from her father. "Justice can walk slow, but it doesn't walk backward." She hoped it was true. The city needed justice in every corner. News stations exploded with coverage of Wyatt's arrest, footage of him being led away in handcuffs. Ebony noticed how calm he appeared on camera, as if confident in his ability to beat the charges. That calmness sent a chill through her. Men like Wyatt rarely surrendered. Ebony forced herself to remain vigilant. Over the next week, Ebony answered FBI interviews, giving statements about how she obtained the evidence. Instead of going straight to the 10K Center, the FBI interviews giving statements about how she obtained the evidence. Patrice Dawson also surfaced, providing testimony about her experiences on the force. The dominoes fell. Some officers came forward, hoping for leniency by confessing their roles in the extortion ring. The city council was in disarray. The police chief was placed on administrative leave, stammering in front of cameras that he knew nothing. Ebony didn't buy it. Another name emerged, a deputy mayor alleged to have received bribes from Wyatt. The scale was staggering, but Ebony also saw the city's spirit stirring. Protests formed outside City Hall, demanding resignations. People had finally found their voice. One morning, Ebony scrolled through an online forum, reading comments from local residents. They expressed shock, outrage, and some relief that the truth was out. A few trolls spewed conspiracy theories that Ebony was part of a rival real estate group or a deep state soldier. Ebony dismissed that nonsense. The overwhelming reaction was gratitude that someone had exposed the rottenness. She whispered to herself, "This is why we fought." Just as Ebony began to feel at ease, a grim phone call from Keller shattered her sense of calm. "We got intel that some loyalists to Wyatt are planning retaliation. We don't know the target, but it could be any of you who brought him down, especially you, Ebony." Ebony's stomach clenched. She'd learned from the war that a wounded predator could be most dangerous. Keller insisted they move Ebony and the others to a more secure safe house. Ebony chafed at the thought, but for Cam's sake she agreed. They were transferred late at night to a rural property outside the city. A ring of agents guarded it. Ebony paced the small living room, feeling caged. Cassandra tried to comfort her. "It's just until they finalize charges and lock Wyatt up tight. Once the court denies him bail, maybe we can breathe easier." Ebony only nodded, the warrior in her hating that she had to stand by, protected by others. The next evening, Ebony stood at a window overlooking a field swaying in the breeze. The hush of the countryside contrasted sharply with the city's tension. She worried for Ruby's diner, for all the folks who had stood up to oppression. She worried that the city might revert to fear if Wyatt or his cronies found a way to slip free. As if on cue, her phone chimed. She answered. "Hello, Ms. Royce," said an unfamiliar female voice. "My name is Ada Penelope Holt. I'm working with the state prosecutor's office. We want you at tomorrow's press conference. There's going to be a formal announcement about the charges. Your presence could demonstrate that whistleblowers and victims can't be intimidated. Ebony's stomach fluttered. You want me in front of cameras? I'm not sure that's wise. Ada Holt's tone was gentle. I understand, but your role is already public. People see you as the soldier who came home and wouldn't let corruption stand. Your courage could inspire more witnesses to come forward. We'll arrange full security. Ebony glanced at Cassandra. The journalist nodded encouragement. Ebony thought of all the times in the army when she'd refused to let fear control her. All right, she said quietly. I'll do it. The next morning was a blur. The FBI provided bulletproof vests for Ebony and Cassandra. Cameras were set up on the courthouse steps, a small podium at the center. Media crews buzzed like hornets. Ebony's hands felt clammy. She whispered to Cassandra, I'm used to leading squads or setting ambushes. Public speaking, not so much. Cassandra offered a tiny grin. You've faced worse. Just speak from the heart. People want to hear your story. The press conference began with the district attorney listing the charges: racketeering, extortion, conspiracy. They named Wyatt and multiple indicted officers. Ebony spotted a mixture of tension and hope in the assembled crowd. The DA finally introduced Ebony, calling her a key figure in exposing systemic corruption. She stepped to the podium, microphone capturing every breath. Cameras clicked. She cleared her throat, voice unsteady at first. I served overseas, fighting enemies far from home. I never expected to come back and see my own community terrorized by men with badges and powerful bank accounts. I only did what any American should do when faced with injustice. I stood up. She paused, her gaze scanning the crowd. St. Aurora deserves to be free from fear, from bribery, from the theft of our livelihoods. This city can't heal overnight, but if each of us finds the courage to speak out, corruption will find no shelter. She stepped back, her heart pounding. A smattering of applause rose from the spectators. Some journalists shouted questions, but the DA closed the conference. Security ushered Ebony back inside. Cassandra beamed. You were perfect. Just then, Ebony's phone buzzed, an urgent text from Patrice Dawson. Watch your back. Hearing chatter. Danger. Ebony's throat tightened. She showed the message to Keller. He frowned. We'll get you out of here. Let's not take any chances. Ebony nodded. They took a side exit, descending a concrete stairwell to an underground parking area. Ebony and Cassandra walked side by side, flanked by agents. Up ahead, Ebony spotted their transport SUV, engine running. Her nerves tingled, the hair on her neck standing upright. Something felt off. A single shot rang out, echoing in the concrete structure. Everyone dropped. Ebony's soldier reflexes kicked in. She pressed Cassandra down behind a parked sedan, scanning for muzzle flashes. One agent yelled, "Sniper, top floor!" Another shot pinged off the SUV's hood. Agents scrambled, returning fire. Ebony's breath came fast, adrenaline spiking. She glimpsed a figure on the upper level, partially concealed behind a column. The figure fired again, sparks dancing on the ground near Ebony's cover. She clenched her jaw. This was the retaliation Patrice warned about. Ebony peered around the corner of the sedan, carefully aiming her concealed handgun. She fired twice, forcing the sniper to duck. An agent took the opportunity to sprint toward the ramp, flanking from behind. More shots, then a pained cry. Ebony's heart hammered. She hoped the agent wasn't seriously wounded. Another volley of gunfire, and the sniper's weapon clattered to the concrete from above. The figure either fled or went down. Agents shouted, "Clear!" Keller rushed over, rifle in hand. "We got him! Let's move!" Ebony helped Cassandra up, quickly checking for injuries. Cassandra was trembling but unharmed. They rushed to the SUV. Agents hustled them inside, peeling out of the underground garage. Sirens wailed as police and paramedics converged. Ebony caught sight of a man being dragged out of the upper floor, unconscious. She recognized him from O'Neill's circle, one of those hardcore loyalists. Her mind reeled at how close they'd come to tragedy. By midday, the courthouse shooting was headline news. Ebony felt a wave of anger. These criminals would not go quietly, but each violent act only further confirmed their guilt in the public eye. People demanded deeper investigations. The following days saw more arrests. The web connecting Wyatt to powerful city elites was exposed. Bank accounts were frozen. Ebony learned that O'Neill and his cronies faced additional charges for attempted murder. She saw footage of them in court. Heads hung low. The city was in uproar, but an uproar that might lead to redemption. Weeks passed in a blur of depositions and hearings. Ebony and the whistleblowers, along with Cassandra's relentless coverage, held the city's attention. She spent hours in sterile conference rooms, retelling her story to federal lawyers and grand juries. Cam was well enough to come forward and speak about his assault. Ruby from the diner came forth with her own experiences of intimidation. Patrice testified about the precinct's dirty secrets. The more they all spoke, the less the conspirators could hide. Eventually, Ebony stood in the main courtroom for the Wyatt trial. She testified calmly, describing how the files were obtained. Wyatt's defense team tried to paint her as a renegade soldier with questionable methods. Ebony refused to be rattled. She answered each question with firm clarity. After 4 hours on the stand, her part was done. She met Cassandra and Cam in the hallway. They exchanged nervous hopes. A verdict might take days or weeks. On the 5th day of deliberation, a hush fell over the city as the jury returned. Ebony watched from a packed courtroom. When the judge read, "Guilty on multiple counts," Ebony's eyes closed in relief. Wyatt stood stoic, a vein pulsing in his temple. Sentencing would come later, but the maximum range was decades behind bars. The ripple effect of that guilty verdict would touch every official who had collaborated. Ebony pictured a wave of resignation letters and plea deals. Truth had prevailed, at least in this battle. Afterward, Ebony stepped outside, alone for a moment, onto the courthouse steps. The sun beamed down, warmer than it had felt in a long time. Cassandra emerged, phone in hand, snapping a quick picture. Ebony scowled playfully. "I'm not big on photos," Cassandra teased. "Tough luck, hero. People need to see that you made a difference." Ebony exhaled. She remembered a quote from Harriet Tubman she'd read once. "Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world." Ebony smiled at the memory. "We're all part of changing this world, even if just one city at a time," she said softly. Cassandra gave a nod. "Exactly, and maybe we can keep going. There's always another fight out there." She lowered her phone. "But for now, let's celebrate with something from Ruby's kitchen, shall we?" Ebony laughed, a genuine from-the-gut laugh that made passers-by glance. She realized how exhausted she was, and how good it felt to anticipate something normal like a diner meal. "Yes, let's do that." They drove across town, passing a few boarded-up buildings, but Ebony noticed new signs of hope. Fresh murals, a volunteer group handing out pamphlets about community development. One billboard read, "Clean up St. Aurora, stand against corruption." Ebony felt her heart lighten. At Ruby's kitchen, they found the diner busier than ever. Word must have spread that Wyatt and his police cronies were no longer looming. Locals felt safe spending money here again. Ruby greeted Ebony and Cassandra like family, ushering them to a cozy booth. "You did it," Ruby said quietly, tears in her eyes. "Bless you both. You gave us our city back." Ebony brushed aside the praise. "I just played my part. Now it's up to everyone to keep it clean." Ruby nodded, placing menus before them. "People around here have awakened, honey. Corruption ain't so easy when folks stand united. Now order whatever you want. On the house." As Ebony opened the menu, Cassandra teased, "Careful, Ebony's appetite is legendary after a mission." They laughed together. Ebony allowed herself a moment to feel the victory. They'd forced the city's darkest secrets into the light. Wyatt was behind bars, countless complicit officials were indicted, and honest leadership was beginning to step up. Ebony knew it wouldn't be perfect. She remembered Bishop's final line from the sample stories she'd once read. "There's always another." But Ebony also knew communities could fight back, and she had witnessed it here. After a hearty meal, Ebony parted ways with Cassandra, hugging her dear friend tight. Then Ebony found herself driving along Maple Avenue, the same street she'd walked that first day, feeling the ominous hush. Now the hush was replaced by cautious optimism. She pulled up in front of a small storefront that had once been up for sale. The sign in the window read, "For rent, commercial space, month to month, lease." Ebony considered it. She had some savings from her army career, plus a settlement she'd earned after being wrongfully injured. Maybe she could start her own security consulting firm, or a simple community center, or even a training studio for self-defense. Something that served the neighborhood rather than drained it. Stepping out, she examined the empty shop's interior through dusty glass. She pictured what it could become. She wasn't naive. She knew the city's wounds ran deep, but she also believed in the power of rebuilding. A voice behind her startled her. It'd be a solid spot for a community outreach project. Ebony turned to see Cam leaning on a cane, half grinning. "Doc said I need to walk more, so? I'm out for a stroll." Ebony smirked. "I was thinking the same. Maybe offer free self-defense classes, or a place for kids to learn discipline." He nodded. "Count me in. I can teach folks how to keep themselves safe, so no one has to kneel to bullies again." Warmth spread through Ebony's chest. "Let's do it." For the first time in months, she felt genuinely hopeful. She took a moment to remember everything it cost to get here. Carson risking his life to leak the files. Patrice losing her career. Cassandra fighting to publish the truth. Ruby standing tall against intimidation. Cam almost paying with his life. So many threads woven into one tapestry of defiance. They strolled back to Ebony's truck under a bright midday sun, discussing ideas. Ebony realized she was forging a new chapter, no longer just a soldier stuck in the memories of foreign deserts, but a protector in her hometown, committed to honest progress. As they parted, Ebony repeated a quiet mantra. "I won't abandon St. Aurora. We stand. We rebuild." A month later, Ebony's phone rang in the small office she'd set up in that once vacant storefront. She had a battered desk, a second-hand chair, and motivational posters on the walls. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She picked up. A familiar voice came through. Cassandra, bursting with excitement. "Ebony, the sentencing just finished. Wyatt got 30 years. They're also hitting him with a massive forfeiture of assets. The city's officials who were indicted are mostly taking plea deals. We may have real reforms soon. The new police chief is cleaning house. This is huge." Ebony's eyes grew misty. "It's the best news I've heard all day. Let's hope it's a real turning point." "It will be," Cassandra affirmed. "And guess what? Ruby's Diner is hosting a community victories dinner. You better come." Ebony chuckled. "Wouldn't miss it." After she hung up, she swiveled in her chair, gazing at a large map of St. Aurora pinned to the wall. She had circled the neighborhoods that had been most victimized by corrupt schemes. She intended to lead programs to help them rebuild and stand strong. She recalled a quote for times like this. "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." She believed that with all her heart. That evening, Ebony prepared to close up. She stepped outside, pausing to stare at the twilight sky above the city. Neon lights flickered, cars rolled by, voices mingled in the air. For a second, she pictured the war zones overseas, how they too had their moments of uneasy calm after conflict. But here at home, the fight had been personal, the victory partial yet meaningful. She understood that corruption could resurface if people grew complacent, but at least now St. Aurora had a chance. She locked the storefront door, pockets jingling with keys. A wave of gratitude washed over her for the allies she'd gained and the lessons learned. She walked to her truck, the same sturdy vehicle that had seen her through every chase, every hair-raising escape. Sliding in, she turned the ignition, feeling the engine rumble. With a final glance at the quiet street, she whispered to the city, "We're not done, but we're on our way." As she drove off into the softly lit streets, Ebony Royce allowed herself a rare smile. She didn't need medals or parades. She needed to see ordinary citizens breathing easier, small businesses flourishing, families unafraid of losing their homes to crooked deals. That was the justice she'd fought for abroad, and it was the same justice she fought for here at home. In the days that followed, news of Wyatt's sentencing, the massive crackdown on the Midtown precinct, and the forced resignations of key figures in City Hall reshaped St. Aurora's political landscape. Citizens demanded accountability, forming watchdog groups and electing new leaders who promised transparent governance. Ruby's Diner thrived like never before, its booths filled with spirited discussions about rebuilding the community. The vacant storefront Ebony rented began transforming into a small training center where residents learned self-defense and civic engagement. Cam taught classes on safety awareness, Carson found a new job in the restructured city records department, and Patrice Dawson occasionally dropped by to share insights from her investigative days. Still, Ebony never grew complacent. She knew that corruption, like weeds, could reappear. But now, the people of St. Aurora had learned they could stand against it. And Ebony was there as a living reminder that sometimes one determined person, with the truth, can ignite a revolution. She thought often of an old principle hammered into her during her army years: leave no one behind. That's exactly what she planned to do for her hometown. Never leave it behind. Never let it sink back into fear. And she believed that if enough people felt the same way, the city's bright future wouldn't just be an illusion. Standing by the half-renovated training center one late afternoon, Ebony gazed at the sunset. She recalled the final lesson she'd share with any who asked. True power rests in the people who decide that justice and compassion matter more than fear. If the powerful try to strip your voice, you find a way to speak louder. And if they try to buy your silence, you remember that integrity has no price tag. That, she decided, was the deepest lesson of all. She scrawled it on a poster and taped it to the center's wall. Stand up, speak truth, fear nothing. The greatest battles are fought in our own backyards, and justice is the torch that lights the path forward. She traced the words with her finger, a contented smile curving her lips. This was her legacy now. Not as a soldier overseas, but as a defender of home. And whenever someone asked if the fight was worth it, Ebony would tell them yes, with unwavering conviction. Because seeing neighbors free from intimidation, seeing small business owners rebuild, and seeing children walk these streets unafraid was worth every ounce of her strength. In the aftermath, once the city began to stabilize, Ebony took a quiet moment to reflect on the philosophical lessons gleaned from her experience. She realized that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight in familiar places against enemies who look like us. She learned that truth, once exposed, has a momentum of its own, but it requires people with courage to push it into the light. She recognized that communities are only as strong as the bonds of trust they nurture. If corruption sows fear, unity must sow solidarity. She embraced the wisdom that hope isn't a naive wish, but a discipline, an active choice to believe in the better angels of human nature. She recognized that no victory is permanent if we become complacent, but also no defeat is permanent if we remain steadfast. Above all, she rediscovered that freedom is fragile, always in need of vigilant defenders, willing to stand up for what's right, even if it means standing alone at first. Yet in the end, no one truly stands alone if they fight for truth and justice, because these ideals resonate in every human heart, longing to be free. And so Ebony Royce carried these lessons forward, day by day, quietly demonstrating them in her new life's work. She remained humble, grounded in the simple truth that an ordinary person can do extraordinary things when the cause is just. Whenever doubts arose, she looked around at the city once stifled by fear, now stirring with hope, and resolved, "This is why we never back down."